بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Thank you very much for coming out here, and also we really extend our gratitude and thanks for Dr. Feldman for taking time from his extraordinarily busy schedule to come up here and be with us. I want to say that Dr. Feldman, I did read his book, Jihad, and I'm looking after Jihad, which is a very important title as well. Ma wara al-Jihad, what comes after Jihad. In other words, once the fighting stops, what do we do? Because one of the things about fanaticism, as was once identified as the redoubling of efforts once the goal has been forgotten. And I think that that is a very useful definition, because I think what ends up being, in essence, a replacement for effective practice, fanaticism can often become the end in and of itself, because it's a very stimulating experience to be a fanatic, to be somebody who has set aside reason and is now working solely on the conviction that he is right and no other. And that is definitely a problem that we have as a community. And I would say we, meaning Bani Adam, not just the Muslims, because I think this is a very interesting problem that we have in the West, which is the exceptionalism of the West. This idea that Western civilization is the protagonist in a world comedy, because it can't be a tragedy, because the secret of tragedy is the tragic hero has a flaw, and the flaw is almost always identified as hubris or overweening pride, and the Greeks were very clever in that. But when you look at the comedy of the world, and I don't mean comedy in the sense of HBO comedy or whatever, I'm talking about comedy meaning literary comedy, that there's a happy ending. So the idea in comedy is that this protagonist called the West is going to have a happy ending where everybody becomes westernized. This is ultimately the belief of many fanatics within the secular Western or even the religious Western traditions, that we must all become Western. This idea that democracy is the end-all, Fukuyama's idea that there's nothing beyond the Western liberal creature, that we have arrived at some evolutionary stage in our development that they decided to go ahead with the coup, and a fellow named Kermit Roosevelt, who was the grandson of the President Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, not the second one, he actually almost single-handedly went over there and has led to the best being the West and forget all the rest. So, and if you think I'm making this up, one of the things you'll note in articles often is when a plane goes down, they will say 2 British died, 2 Americans, 2 Canadians, and several other nationalities. And I'm always curious about what those other nationalities were, Rwandans and Zimbabwe, or, I mean, none of them count really. And this is, I think, in essence, what a lot of people in other parts of the world feel. Find difficult about this thesis, and I appreciate, and I'm in no way trying to undermine what Dr. Feldman said, but what I do find about this thesis is an incredible act of denial on behalf of so many people, not only in Washington, D.C., but in other centers of power and authority, in which somehow the Muslims just, what's wrong with them? You know, Bernard Lewis says, what went wrong? What went wrong? What's wrong with the Muslims? You see, and this is like the old white view of blacks in America. Why don't they just pull themselves up by their bootstraps? You know, what's wrong with these people? These people. You see, and there's always a racial undertone. I mean, I really find that there's always a racial undertone in that question. What's wrong with these people? Why can't they simply get their act together? Well, like Dr. Martin Luther King said, if they stole your bootstraps from you, how do you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? So I would really say that I believe that the real question is not, is Islam and democracy compatible, or can Islam embrace democracy? I believe the real question is, can the West truly embrace Islam as a full-fledged member of the international community? Because there are 1.3 billion people on this planet that are Muslim, varying degrees of education, but they do believe that Islam is a revelation from God. Now, one of the major problems that we have, and I know that Dr. Feldman did his PhD in Averroes, or Ibn Rushd, at Oxford, and so he knows very well, and what he was saying is absolutely sound, that the mujtahid always recognized that he was not speaking on behalf of God, that the overwhelming majority of laws in the Islamic tradition are not seen as theocratic, but rather they are laws that are derived from the efforts of human beings attempting to understand the divine will. Now, that is also true for many Western legal theorists who believe in the idea of natural law, because they are also attempting to understand what the divine will is. What is the natural law here? What is the most rational and truest course that we can take in any given legal scenario? And this is always ended in the Muslim books with the question, with the emphatic statement, after they give their legal ruling, Wallahu a'lam, and God knows better. In other words, this is the best I can do. And so it's important for Muslims to recognize that rather than looking at Islamic law as a monolithic theocratic system that was sent from on high, it must be recognized as divine principles that were given to us. Most of them are completely congruent with the very same principles that are working in this society, which is an attempt to establish the most just ruling in any given situation. We will differ on the particulars, but in the general principles, I think many Muslims would be deeply shocked to find that the very same legal principles working in Western constitutional law are the same legal principles that are working in Islamic law. And I am not in any way exaggerating. I believe, because I have studied both of them enough to know the truth of that statement. And what I find very unfortunate is that most of our Muslim legal scholars are almost entirely ignorant of Western legal theory and system. And Dr. Feldman, who is a constitutional lawyer, has a PhD in Islamic legal theory. So this is somebody who is coming from the West, from a Western constitutional theoretical position, and yet recognizing that Islam is, in fact, a legal system that can absorb much of what we hold dear in the West in terms of our democratic ideals. So I would really say, I want to end this with a few things. One, I would say, first of all, that democracy, if we mean by democracy, demos, the rule of the mob, I don't think anybody wants the rule of the mob. But if we mean citizenry, in which human beings do participate in the quality of life that they desire for themselves, for their children, and for others, then I would say democracy is absolutely compatible with the Islamic tradition. But this is a very nebulous term as it's defined presently, and there are many problems with it. I would also say that monarchy is also compatible with the Islamic tradition and has been proven to be so during periods of benevolence such as Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who is a Khalifa, but in essence he is a monarch. A monarch is somebody who ultimately has the ultimate say, but he's still working within the principles of law. Now, a tyrant is one who does not in any way, shape, or form adhere to the law, but he follows his personal whims. And this for too long has been the norm in the Muslim country, and there are many reasons for it. And we could go into those reasons in considerable detail, because it begins in 740 with the Berber rebellion in Morocco, which breaks the unity of the Muslims, but it can even precede that and be in 656 when the Khawarij break and there's an initial split within the Muslim polity, which led to civil war. Now, one of the important things to remember is that by and large throughout Muslim history, the rulers were reasonably benign. And they were not despotic, that people actually did live in reasonably just conditions. Unfortunately, that has not been the case for some time, which has led to social conditions in the Muslim world that are both degrading and also debilitating. They actually cause a type of enervation to occur in the will and spirit of the people. And so when we ask in the Muslim world, what went wrong? What's wrong with those people? The Muslims have proven to be some of the most productive minds of our current civilization, holding some of the highest positions in corporations, in medicine, in engineering. We've had Nobel Prize winners. We have participated when the breath of freedom has been there to encourage that. But too often it is not there. The Treaty of Tripoli, which is a treaty that was written up to create the Ottomans and between the Americans, and this was proposed by George Washington's government and was ratified without any dissenting voices by the government of John Adams. Article 11, probably written by Joel, peace between the Barlow, says, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, and as the said states have never entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever interrupt the harmony existing between the two countries. Now, this was translated into Turkish, and in 1899, when McKinley invaded the Philippines, the American government was worried about Muslims declaring a holy war against the Americans. And so they sent Oscar Strauss, who was the then acting ambassador to Turkey, they sent him with a special diplomatic mission in which this article was translated into Turkish and given to Sultan Abdul Hamid. And he was requested to send an edict to the Muslims of the Philippines to prevent them from declaring a jihad against the Americans, as the Americans were not there to interrupt the religion of the Muslims. And it was not a declaration of war against the Muslims of Mindanao and southern Philippines. And this man, Mr. Strauss, in his autobiography under 4 administrations, wrote, in order to be able to take up the matter very fully with the Sultan, I had anticipated all kinds of questions and armed myself with pertinent information. Among them, I thought he might seek some assurance as to our government's attitude towards Mohammedanism, and to reassure him that I had come prepared with a translation into Turkish of Article 11, an early treaty between the United States and Tripoli of 1796. When the Sultan had read this, his face lighted up. This is Sultan Abdul Hamid. His face lighted up. It would give him pleasure, he said, to act in accordance with my suggestions for 2 reasons: for the sake of humanity and to be helpful to the United States of America. And that shows the goodwill of a Muslim ruler. And so our challenge to the United States of America is to be Americans. And my challenge to the Muslims is to be Muslims. And if we both held to those principles, there wouldn't be any conflict.